Welcome to the Tao of Pizza, where we feature top logistics leaders, entrepreneurs, and supply chain innovators and share their inspiring stories with a holistic twist.
Dr. Jeremy Weiss here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders. I'm here with my co-host today, Mark Hiddleson, founder of Special Racks. Mark, tell people about your podcast.
I'm a host of the Tao of Pizza podcast, where I talk with top industry innovators in the warehousing, logistics, and supply chain business with a holistic twist.
And, we're here with Matt Hertz, the founder of Third Person. You can check him out at thirdperson.co. And before we formally introduce you, Matt, we like to point out some other episodes of the podcast people should check out. A couple in this realm, I guess I lump it into e-commerce. I had one of the co-founders of RX Bar on the podcast. That was an interesting episode. I'm going to go the protein bar route because I like protein bars. I had the founder of IQ Bar, which was also an interesting episode, and one of the co-founders of Quest Nutrition, which was an interesting, Tom Bilyeu. So, Mark, what are some of the fan favorites over on your podcast?
I have a lot in this space, and I love to connect with people in fulfillment. But the ones that come that are top of mind to me is Matt Burke. He's worked on some really high-profile projects like Birchbox. Chris Murphy, a longtime friend of mine in 3PL business. And then recently I interviewed Jeremy Van Pufflin of Prism, and they've done some automation that was interesting. So those are some great episodes to check out.
Awesome. Yeah, check that out. And this episode is brought to you by Rise 25 and Special Racks. I'm going to just say Mark is a humble guy, and he's also one of the nicest people on the planet. Mark has been serving the warehousing and logistics industry since 1996. I know you've aged well, Mark, but they specialize in facility design, racking, shelving, conveyor systems, all the stuff that makes these 3PLs work, actually. They've helped companies like Costco, Home Depot, and just lots of warehouses, manufacturers, and 3PLs. So I'm glad to get you and Matt connected because there's a lot of stuff that you could do together. You can check it out at specialracks.com. And Rise 25. Rise 25, we help businesses connect to their dream relationships and partnerships. We do that. Number one, we're an easy button for a company to launch and run a podcast. We do the strategy, accountability, and the full execution production. And number two, we're an easy button for a company's gifting. We make gifting and staying top of mind for clients, partners, prospects, even staff from a culture perspective, simple and easy and affordable. You just give us a list of addresses. We do everything else. And it's not like a one-off gift. We like to send a campaign of gifts. And Mark knows this. For any of our clients, partners, we like to send 3 or 4 gifts a year for 3 or 4 years. Okay. So the number one thing, Matt, in my life is relationships. I'm always looking at ways to give to my relationships. And I found no better way over the past decade to profile the people and companies I admire and share with the world what they're working on the podcast and send them sweet treats in the mail. So you can check out rise25.com. I am excited to introduce Matt Hertz. He has 15 years experience leading e-commerce operations as an early employee and first operations hire at Rent the Runway, Birchbox, Ship, and so many more. In 2017, he founded Second Marathon, which is a supply chain consultancy. They've helped e-commerce brands like Hexclad, Away, Thuma, BarkBox, Birdies, and Milk Bar optimize their supply chains, and he launched Third Person, which is a digital marketplace and enables e-commerce brands to discover and connect with 3PLs. Matt, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Jeremy. I've done a number of webinars and podcasts over the years, and I think your way of distilling my background into that 15-second soundbite was probably the best I've heard. So, no, thanks for having me, and Mark as well. It's great having 2 co-hosts to drill me for the next few minutes here.
Yeah. This is going to be pleasurable. But just start us off with Third Person and what you do. And I'm going to pull up your website and we'll poke around.
Sure. Yeah. So as you mentioned quite succinctly, Jeremy, Third Person is effectively a digital marketplace that helps e-commerce brands discover and connect with 3PLs. The way I kind of explain it to my 75-year-old mother who has no logistics background is it's sort of like a dating app, helping brands find fulfillment partners. So completely free experience for brands to use. They sign up, takes a few minutes to share a little bit of information on who they are as a brand and their needs, their profile. And then at the core of our product, we've built this AI-powered algorithm that essentially scores Mark's hot sauce company against each of the hundreds and hundreds of 3PLs that we have on the platform, each of whom have also shared their ideal client. So they've taken the time to share with us what good looks like for them. And our matching algorithm will then present the top 10 matches ranked by score and enable the brand to connect with any of those directly through the platform. So a really simple tool to help 3PLs get qualified leads and help brands find qualified partners for their own needs.
I forgot to give a shout out to Evan Rock. That's the reason we met, actually. Evan Rock of Quiet Logistics. When I was looking for a 3PL, he's like, we're not a fit for you. We're not a fit for you, but you need to talk to Matt. And I went on the platform. It's super easy to use and it gives amazing suggestions. So I've personally used it. Talk about the evolution of the pricing model a little bit? I know it's free for brands to go on and find it.
Sure, yeah. So we're not a church or a charity here, so we need to make our money somewhere, somehow. When we launched the business back in March of 2024, so I think I failed to mention that. So we're a little over 18 months young here, almost 2 years. When we launched the business, it was completely free for brands, which was something that was really important to me because, as you mentioned in my intro, I ran a consulting business prior to Third Person, and really Third Person is that sort of digital evolution of the key consulting service that we were offering at Second Marathon, which was helping brands lead a full service 3PL search or RFP. And in that product, in our consulting business, we charge brands a lot of money. I think a fair amount of money, but a lot of money nonetheless. So we sort of had this aha moment saying, hey, let's have a free experience for brands so we can work with many more brands who maybe weren't able to afford our services in our consulting business. So we launched this free model for brands. It continues to be free today. On the 3PL side, and that's how we get paid. Initially, the model was, and when I say initially, up until about 6 weeks ago, earlier in October, the model was purely a success fee for 3PLs. So 3PLs would pay us 2% of total revenue for 24 months. So if, Evan from Quiet Logistics, who's a good friend of mine as well, if he wins the business that discovered him through the platform, then Quiet would pay Third Person 2% of revenue for the next 24 months. So it kind of builds in a bit of continuity there. What we launched a couple months ago, as you see here on the screen, is that model I just explained is now known as our basic model. So nothing is changing there, no monthly fees. But what we've introduced is 3 levels of monthly paid tiers. So a $99 a month plan, $4.99, and a $9.99 with annual breaks. And really, the impetus here is that the number one thing that 3PLs were asking us after, send us more qualified leads is how do we close more of these leads? Right? How do we get better at what we do? And not just leads from your platform, from Third Person, but leads they get through their website or going to trade shows or, different marketing initiatives that they have, social media, et cetera. So what we're trying to do is create more marketing infrastructure for 3PLs. So not only be a really effective lead gen or sales tool for 3PLs, but really support the marketing team. So as you can see here, we're starting to roll in more, analytics and insights and data on what brands are asking for and the 3PLs who are successful, like what are they doing to be successful? And where we sit in the ecosystem where we have really strong relationships with brands as well as 3PLs and logistics tech companies, we're starting to have more events and opportunities for 3PLs to kind of get their name out there in a really effective way.
This makes sense. I'm sure, I would get in if you're a 3PL, this may increase as you get better at this. So people can get in while it lasts, I guess.
Sure. Yeah. We're, as I said, we're about 6 weeks into this, and I think giving it 90 days or a quarter or two is probably appropriate to see, what the stickiness is and who's kind of opting into which tier. But yeah, we've been really pleased to see the early traction of 3PLs upgrading to one of these 3 plans.
Yeah, I'm eager to jump off the call and text about 10 people. So my top clients are 3PLs. And I mean, this looks awesome. And I'm not sure. I mean, I don't think I try to stay on top of where things are going, but the things people complain about, like the RFP process is kind of clunky. If you have your own website and you're a 3PL, you do end up weeding out a lot of non-fits. So I had an earlier question though. I wanted to jump in. Would you share a little bit about your transition from the warehouse side and an operator, sort of like before second? How did you get into consulting? Do you mind going back and sharing a little bit about your background?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I came from the operating side, the brand side. I was that sort of in-house, head of operations person at a few startups, going back to 2009 when I joined what was a little known company, Rent the Runway, a women's dress rental business, which is now a publicly traded company. But I joined them a couple of weeks into that business as their fifth employee and first operations hire with no operations experience, by the way. I don't think I could even have spelled FedEx back then, but I was fairly fungible, and was able to sort of figure things out initially, and then join the team at Birchbox as their first employee and help them get to about 1 million orders a month in revenue. A couple hundred million dollars. Sorry, a million orders a month in orders and a couple $100 million a year in revenue. So we were really that rocket ship, and it was a lot of fun being kind of an in-house operator and managing, the warehousing side, where we mostly work with 3PLs, as well as, negotiating shipping costs and procurement and packaging and some CX and planning, kind of all the functions. And, I wanted to start my own business, is sort of the candid truth. And I was born and raised in Canada. I was living here in the United States. I was living in New York and then San Francisco, and I've been here in Nashville for about 8 years. And because I was on work visas, I couldn't be an entrepreneur, right? The moment I got my green card, which happened in 2017, which coincides perfectly with when I started my own business, was kind of that moment to say, hey, now I can be an entrepreneur. I can work for myself, start my own business. Let's give it a whirl. So I started on the consulting route because, low barriers to entry, and all you need is a computer and, a network to really start a consulting business. And ran that for, about 6 or 7 years before putting all my energy, all my chips, so to speak, into what we're building here at Third Person.
Um, no, Mark, thanks for asking that because it's really interesting to hear the background. And so piggybacking on that, and this is a question mark for you too, actually. Man, I'm curious, you've seen it now connecting 3PLs and also working at 3PLs. What are some of the big mistakes 3PLs make? And Mark, I want you to answer that too after Matt.
Yeah, I mean, how much time do we have? Yeah, I always say that's somewhat tongue in cheek. I mean, I look, 3PLs, the market is highly fragmented, right? There are literally over 10,000 3PLs in the United States alone, right? So there's many, 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 many options. I like to say it's kind of like trying to find a bar or a restaurant. You live in Chicago, right? If I said, hey, find me an Irish pub to go to. I mean, there's an endless, or find me a
I have
steakhouse,
some of
right?
my
I mean,
favorites. Yeah.
sure, yeah, exactly, right. And so when there's a fragmented market, you think of restaurants or hotels or I don't know, taxis, right? I mean, markets where there's a lot of options, there's an opportunity to create intelligence to kind of bind them. And with 3PLs, unfortunately, they are really, really poor at qualifying leads, right? At like really having self-awareness regarding their ICP, their ideal client profile. Like too many 3PLs still try to be everything to everyone. And like in my work, having matched now literally thousands of brands with 3PL providers, like I see 3PL struggling because they're taking on clients that really don't fit their operational sweet spot, whether that's SKU complexity, it's a 3PL that's not set up to take on, fashion footwear and apparel, which is a very high SKU industry, or order volume, too big or too small, or special handling needs, whether it's a company that needs temp control or, refrigeration. So I think like the best 3PLs heading into 2026 and, really for the foreseeable future are ones who are really, really dialed in and know exactly who they serve best. And, more importantly, have the discipline to say no. And I think saying no is really, really difficult for many salespeople I've come across at 3PLs who are obviously commissioned to bring in more revenue.
I mean, that's, I think, applicable to all businesses really, is like someone's really focused in on a niche and their messaging and everything. Their operations are, streamlined according to the niche they're serving. And what you're saying is a lot of 3PLs could just serve their sweet spot and not take on, maybe clients that would drag down their operations and make things inefficient. And I was curious where you went with that. That's why I left it broad. Mark, what about you? What are some, and you may have a different take, like from the actual, you know, layout perspective, but what are some of the mistakes you see 3PLs? Because you go in all the time and you're kind of, outfitting their operations in a sense.
Yeah, and we try to find out what the pain points are. And I was thinking my clients, they're all doing it really well. And I want to say that.
Well, I mean, let's say before they were your clients, right?
No, but I hear the rumor. I mean, there are, so Matt touches on a lot. I mean, if you don't have a Matt, what they do is I would say, and not just my clients, I would say in general, people will try to compete as cost only. And I think that goes to what Matt said about not having your niche. Is our best clients, they really have niche clients that they can serve really well at a really high level. And even when they look, it's like, hey, we can find it cheaper over here. You're going, but guys, are you going to get this level of service? So I think, and another thing, that the ones that are succeeding, the 3PLs that are succeeding, their salespeople, they're heavily trained in operations. That's why I wanted to hear about Matt's background, because you've been in the warehouse, you know what the costs are. You're not going to make commitments that it almost makes it hard to sell. If you're in operations, it's like, I know we can't do that. It's like, I know I want to sell it. So I think the ones that are doing really well, they have operational people at a really high level, making those, developing relationships, because like you said, it's all about relationships and creating. That's what's exciting about your project, Matt, is that you're really doing a done for you matchmaking service, which I think that's, in 3PLs, it's the hardest. If you had everybody in the right space at the right thing, everybody would be happy. The cost structure would be right, and everybody would get their stuff on time.
Absolutely. I mean, just on that point, Mark, I like to say that there's not any, everyone, if I had a nickel for every time a brand came to me and said, I hate my 3PL, I'd probably be retired, right? I wouldn't have to run this business, right? I'd have, a sack of nickels. But, without sounding overly tongue in cheek, I don't believe that there's that many bad 3PLs. I think there's bad matches, right? Like I use this kind of analogy, going back to the dating analogy that I mentioned earlier. Like imagine, back when I was a single guy living in New York, a 25-year-old Matt, if I walked into a bar on the Lower East Side on a Friday night and said, who's female, who's 25, and who's single, inevitably a bunch of nice young women raise their hands, and I say, let's go get married. And she goes, yes, let's get married. Would that marriage work out for us? It might, but probably not. Why? Because while I did ask three important questions, the fact that she's female and my age and single, I didn't ask, 100 or, thousands and thousands of other questions that I certainly encourage, my single friends to ask when they're dating, right? So it's really about qualifying those matches, right? Because there's so many 3PLs, brands naively believe that, like, oh, I can work with any of them, right? Or, they work with this other big brand that's aspirational to me, right? I'm a small athleisure company and they work with Lululemon or Vuori. Of course they're going to work out for me. No, it's completely different, as you know.
Yeah. And then also your experience, what was the company with the rental of the clothes? You must have got
Rent the Runway.
Runway, because that's reverse logistics. So if you learn that early in your career, that's another thing I saw on your website is you guys offer reverse logistics, and that's a complete niche of its own. So I love what you're doing, and I was going to ask you too. You've created an ecosystem. You use the word ecosystem, and it's just jump when someone says that, because you create an ecosystem of resources. And I notice you have an event that you host. It looks like twice a year. That's a great way to. Would you mind sharing a little bit about that event, who you invite, and what to expect out of that?
Yeah, absolutely. No, thanks for asking about that. We launched our first we're calling them retreats, and it's here in Nashville at the Soho House in Nashville. We had our first one in September. Our next one's going to be in March of 26. It's already sold out. And then our next one after that will be also in the fall. So we're kind of doing like a spring and a fall event. And we're limiting them to about 45 people. So we want it to be really intentional. We don't want this to be like, if listeners are familiar with, some of the major events like Shop Talk or NRF or eTail West and, Supply Chain Manifest is the big event. All really fun events, but in my opinion, they're not intentional events, right? Like when there's 45 people in a room and focusing on executives, decision makers, one person per org. So, company can't buy 10 tickets and bring their entire sales team, right? It's literally one person. And it's a curated event. So it's sort of it's open to the public, but, we sort of gatekeep, who gets accepted and, who can join just to ensure that there's a good mix of brands and 3PLs and logistics tech providers. Yeah, the feedback after the first event in September was, really terrific. So, no like formal sessions learning about how to negotiate your shipping rates or learning about, tariffs and the impact there. It's really an opportunity for, decision makers to get together in a room, figuratively speaking, over 2 days, and really get to know each other and like be candid and share what they're working on and some of the opportunities there. So, yeah, next year in March, where we're having a few sponsors. We didn't do that in September, but now that I have a better understanding of the costs and economics of big events like this, we
Yeah.
decided to feature a few sponsors. So yeah, really, really excited about March's event, and we're already starting to build a wait list for fall of 26 events. So yeah, we do expect to have more events like this in the future. Some that are probably going to be on a smaller scale. It might be dinners or happy hours, but I think the ability to connect the community who are really excited to meet each other. There's a lot of opportunity to do that.
Yeah, I'm looking just for people listening. You can check out thirdperson.co/retreat for the latest and greatest info whenever you're listening to this. And you can see you have to apply, obviously, from what Matt says. And to what Mark was saying, and you've had some really cool people who participate, right? People from Warby Parker, people from Caspian. There's a lot of really interesting companies on here. Do you tend to get a mix of 3PLs and brands, or what does that look like?
Yeah, we do, and that's part of our sort of curation. So what we're typically targeting is about a third, a third, a third. A third brands. So a third of the roughly 45 attendees are going to be represented by brands. And so they work at shippers, right? E-commerce companies. The Warby Parkers of the world, as you mentioned. We had 1-800-Flowers in the fall. We've got a number of really, we have Dior coming in March as well. And, Apple was there a couple months ago. So we have about a third of the representatives coming from brands, a third of them coming from 3PLs. And the other third is kind of this other bucket, which I kind of describe as like logistics tech companies. So folks like Caspian, who works on duty drawbacks, companies like Passport, which does cross-border shipping. In the fall, we had Two Boxes, which supports 3PLs with returns management software. So we like to have a really nice mix of folks in the room, both buyers and sellers.
Yeah, that's nice. That's I want to sign up. I want to be on the cancellation list for March. But the event I looked in, those do take a ton of effort. I've always wanted to do an event, and Jeremy actually helped me. We put together a 1 day event with a tour and a lunch and a dinner. And I've always wanted to do this, and I figured out why I didn't all those years. It's like this is a lot of work,
It's a
but
lot of work.
the
Yeah.
connections, because I think of all these people I'd love to get in the same room or get them together in the same room, but Steve's not going to drive 5 hours to meet Brian, but they'll meet together in Napa for an event. So I love that. Nashville's a great location too. And but what you the environment you created, one of the things I like to go to events to learn, stay on the cutting edge. But my best friends and I, we always joke, all the best conversations happen in the swimming pool. we used to call it poolside logistics 101, because those are the candid conversations like you are talking about, that people feel comfortable going, these are the real pain points. Like, here's what they're talking about at their roundtable. This is what, and a lot of connections are made in that environment.
Absolutely. And just quickly on that point, Mark, our sort of equivalent of like the poolside conversations is why we're keeping it at only 45 people, because here in Nashville at the Soho House, they have, I think, 48 rooms. So we're effectively buying out the entire hotel part of the Soho House because we want people like when they, when we all went to the gym, one morning, I was there at, 7 a.m. Like there were half a dozen people like on the ellipticals and Pelotons next to me, like working out, right? And they have a sauna there. So, a few of us gone to the sauna. So like you have those kind of candid conversations that are not sort of scripted, sitting, in a stale hotel, conference center with, black tablecloths, right? And we want it to be really kind of organic and natural.
Yeah, nicely done.
Matt, just I want to talk about the event, but the sponsors for a second, and how you choose sponsors, right? Because obviously it's a curated event, and so obviously they're paying you, so we'll give a shout to them too. But also, what are some of the different types of sponsors? I'm looking here. This is for this next one, but obviously you've got a lot of them. Diversify, Geodis, Red Stag Fulfillment, that kind of self-explanatory. Das, Revora. What are some of these companies do?
Yeah, so I should have mentioned that for this event, just like the platform, third person, it's a completely free event for brands to attend, right? Like zero. And the event also includes a 2-night stay at the Soho House. The only cost to a brand is their travel, right? Obviously, if they're local in Nashville, which we had a few last time, they're just an Uber right away, or a car drive. But if they're coming in from Chicago, where we did have a few brands, they're paying their airfare. But otherwise, like all expenses paid. So like incredible value. I've been comped to different events, but usually it's the ticket, it's not the accommodations. But this is different. So, and then 3PLs and logistics tech providers pay about $5,000 to attend the event. So it's $49.50, and that also includes the 2-night stay. So a lot of really great, and it's a 2-day event. We have lots of activity. So tremendous value, but we do charge the non-brands to attend. On the sponsorship side, again, this is something that we're kind of testing, so to speak. For March, we sold out of our sponsors, within the first week. So I think that was a good initial like litmus test that there's a lot of interest to sponsor. We've got a few tiers of sponsors, platinum, sapphire, gold, silver, and bronze. They're all either 3PLs or logistics tech providers. As part of those different sponsors, you get, your name associated with different kind of breakout events. So, we're going to have a couple dinners. We have offsite activities, breakfast, lunches, all the stuff that you usually expect. But we're really trying to make this less commercial. There's no like booths, there's no exhibit hall or exhibit booths or anything like this, and really have an opportunity for these folks to be in our printed materials and in our social materials as we start really promoting it over the next couple of months. Obviously they live on our website now. And the day of the event or the week of the event, at the event, they'll have opportunities. I think at the higher two tiers, they'll have opportunities to kind of give a few minute pitch, on who they are and what their companies do. And with those higher tiers, they also get comp tickets to the event. So there's some immediate ROI there. So yeah, just another little opportunity to kind of showcase a few companies that are doing some really interesting stuff in the market and are curious to kind of take advantage of this 45-person ecosystem that they're going to be a part of.
Yeah, I mean, always curious on people love different resources and software and things to explore. Can you talk a little bit about those companies, like just briefly what they do? Like there's probably a number of these things, but looking at diversified.ai, which is one of the sponsors, just we can roll through some of those resources that are listed here. What do they do?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So I mean, we do have a few 3PLs on this list. We have, Geodis, who's actually based here in Nashville. Coincidentally, Red Stag Fulfillment,
Do they
LVT.
specialize like on the Geodis and Redstag? I know you mentioned the niche. Do they specialize in anything specific?
Yeah, so Geodis tends to work with, enterprise brands, so brands that are doing, typically in excess of, 50 to $100 million in sales. So they're really not historically focused on the SMB market, kind of like, the much, larger market. So, Apple is their biggest customer, is my understanding.
Small company.
Um, yeah, exactly, right. Small Fortune 3 or 2. Red Stag is interesting, is they're also based in Tennessee, but in Knoxville, Tennessee, and they focus on big and bulky. So they do not do clothing and, apparel and little things, but they were working with, Hexclad Fulfillment, which I think, or Hexclad Cookware, which I think you mentioned in the intro, Jeremy, a company
Yeah.
that I've supported over the years, and they were a customer of Red Stag, given like the big and bulk of their product. We have companies like DOS, which is a ERP platform. We have companies like Tusk Logistics, which is an alternative carrier platform. It just essentially helps connect some of these smaller regional and alternative carriers that you're seeing more and more in the market. They built some really cool software behind that. We've mentioned Caspian, in the duty drawback space. So really a nice mix of partners who are participating, and it gives attendees an opportunity to kind of look at their, especially on the brand attendees, to look at their supply chain, and even like their, where e-commerce meets supply chain, look at their entire stack and meet some like really innovative companies like Diversify and DOS and Revora,
What do
and
those do?
Passport.
So versus
Um,
this looks really interesting.
yeah, yeah. So Diversify is actually using this as an opportunity, this event as an opportunity to um, my understanding is that they're going to put behind a lot of marketing leading up to the event, because they're announcing some really interesting new products and sort of coming out of stealth mode. You've probably not heard of them because they have been sort of under the radar purposely, for the first few months here, but they're really building an AI based tool that helps shippers and 3PLs kind of optimize their transportation spend. So they're spending a lot of time on AI diligence for billing, and allowing the shipper, the user, to really optimize how they ship and where they ship, across all different carriers. So really interesting business. The other one you mentioned was
You mentioned Revora, or was that?
yeah, yeah. So interestingly, Revora is in a similar space as Diversify. They're also, very early stage. The two co-founders of Revora are very good friends of mine. I've known them for over a decade, and they're also building tools and AI for 3PLs to really help them optimize the solutions that they provide customers, the end shipper. So really interesting business that's also very, very early days in their journey.
And then Passport?
Yeah, sure. So Passport Global is as the name suggests, they're a cross-border shipping carrier. So started by Alex Yancher, who's been a friend of mine, also for many years. Full disclosure, I am a small investor in Passport, and Alex is a small investor in Third Person. Um, uh, and a really interesting business, asset-light business, but really focused on helping shippers in predominantly in the United States. When I say shippers, it's largely 3PL customers, provide a cross-border solution. So if you're a US based brand shipping out of the US into Canada or into the UK, or elsewhere around the world, you can work directly with Passport to facilitate that cross-border movement. So it's both the actual transportation piece of it, as well as now with this environment with tariffs and all the change that's been happening. They've become sort of like the pretty girl at the high school prom, where everyone's curious about different solutions to stay ahead of the market.
Love it. No, thanks for sharing that. Mark, I'll let you ask the next question. If you have any other resources to piggyback on that, feel free to share any other companies or software or things, because I know you see a lot of stuff too.
Yeah, I was curious if you do anything. I know you mentioned Milk Bar earlier. Do you do a lot in the food space or frozen? In California, that's a lot of our business is frozen. Just a lot of food's grown here. Do you have those niche 3PLs and clients?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, part of my goal with third person and because it's a marketplace, part of my goal in creating sufficient supply is understanding or ensuring that we have a partner for everyone, right? We want to have both providers who support enterprise shippers, small SMBs, pre-launch businesses, that company making protein powder that's pre-launch. We want there to be options for them. We also want options for alcohol shippers, wine shippers, out in your neck of the woods. So, wineshipping.com is one of the largest wine shippers in the market. They do most of the wine of the month clubs, in the Napa Valley, and they're on the platform. But we also have options. So if you're shipping fresh salmon or, I have a friend who runs one of the largest stone crab companies in Miami, and they ship stone crab overnight around the country, and there's not many 3PLs who would be able to support that, right? With their refrigeration and frozen capabilities. So you mentioned Milk Bar, right? I mean, they're shipping ice cream and cakes and truffles and highly perishable food. We've worked with a handful, the Fulton Fish Market in New York, right? A handful of other brands in kind of a similar space. So we need to ensure that there's sufficient supply. So that would Mark's steak company, I think you mentioned Birchbox earlier in the call, or a fresh food company, is coming to us seeking fulfillment support. That we have, at least a couple options for them. So, yeah, these sort of niches, cannabis, CBD, right? That's becoming really popular too. So, yeah, these niches are really important for us to be able to ensure that there's sufficient supply or an ample number of partners who can support their specific needs.
Finally.
I have one last question, and then I'll let Mark ask a question. But you mentioned one thing before I ask is I had Dan Zawacki, who started Lobstergram in 1986. And so it's funny, that interview is, I said, what do lobsters, Howard Stern and Oprah have in common? It was Dan Zawacki with Lobstergram. I think he got he wanted a brand new Lexus. He went into the dealership and just offered him whatever it was, like $20,000 worth of lobster grams or something like that. And they gave him well, not free, but they gave him a Lexus or something like that. But it's a fascinating interview on, again, like shipping a lobster overnight. He started, I think, putting him in his trunk and like going to I think he shipped them himself until he figured out a better way. But, my last question is just you mentioned conferences and groups. I'm wondering in the e-commerce space, whether it's logistics or the brands, you mentioned Shop Talk. What are some of the either groups people should check out or other events that are good to check out?
Yeah, look, there's a lot of the big events. We mentioned some of them. I'm certainly biased to smaller events. I was just at an event hosted by Fulfillment IQ, who's another sponsor of our retreat in March, and they do a lot in technical consulting for 3PLs. I went to an event in Toronto a couple of weeks ago, which was really, really rude to have a conference in Canada in the winter, but it was
That's
really, really
terrible.
fun. Yeah, right. I shared that feedback.
It's like having
tongue in
a
cheek.
conference in Chicago that no in the winter.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Toronto might even be worse, but in any event, it was a really fun event. It was a one-day event, and there couldn't have been more than 100 people. So it was just another touch point, or I should say, validation that these kind of smaller, more intimate events are really cool. So I've always loved like the industry specific events. So there's a big event also in Vegas featuring, I think it's called it's a major pet conference event. I think it's called it's not Zootopia. That's the movie, but it's some funny name like that. But they have all these kind of vertical specific events, in beauty and fashion and the fancy food show, which is also usually in Vegas, and I tend to enjoy those shows. But I think the ROI on those big events is really difficult to validate or to prove. If you're the one spending money
Super
to
Zoo?
attend.
Is it Super Zoo?
Super Zoo, that's the one. That's
Okay.
the one. Zootopia. Yeah,
I
Super
have
Zoo.
kids too, so Zootopia would be like, that's what I'm thinking of. But yeah, I got you.
Yeah,
Super Zoo.
yeah, exactly. Super Zoo. And I'm a big pet guy, dog dad. So I do enjoy that. But yeah, I think there are certainly other um, other ways to kind of market yourself and to increase your business to get leads that are whereas I think the trade show route is certainly becoming a little stale. So I love seeing kind of more innovation there, and having more of these. There are a couple companies that I advise just personally on the side, and they've been really successful in having like small dinners, right? There's one that had a dinner, like a private dinner in Denver last night, and they had, I think it was 18 people at a steakhouse, and also like very curated, nice mix of people. And like at an 18-person dinner at a nice steakhouse in Denver or in Chicago or here in Nashville, you can actually like meet people and have really, really thoughtful conversations. So I don't want to say that I think that's the trend going forward, because I'm still seeing a lot of the former, the big 7,000 person events, at the Venetian or at, the Bellagio in Vegas. And look, there's a time and a place for that. I go to some of those events as well and get my value, but I think the more sort of intimate settings, in-person environments, the happy hours, the dinners, the one-day events, I think are a really interesting opportunity to, participate.
Love it.
Yeah, I love that. I love everything you said. I'm the Warehouse Education and Research Council National Conference is something that I kept on my calendar for years. Have you heard of that, Matt? Work.
It doesn't ring a bell. Yeah.
I want to plug them. It's one of the bigger, but that's where we invented poolside logistics 101. So I love everything about what you're doing, and I kind of have a two-part question. I don't know if it's even related, but would you mind sharing your favorite book, either one you've read, recently or all time? And what would you say? Because I'm not kidding. I mean, I probably have 10 or 20 people that want to say, "Hey, you really need to check this out." What would you say to the 3PLs who I tell to check out your website? What would your advice? So two-part question: favorite book, and what would you tell potential 3PLs looking at your platform?
Yeah, sure. My favorite book, it's probably a two-way tie, but uh, the first one I'll mention, I try to read every January, and I've been having a pretty good record over the last decade or so. But the famous book that we all probably know, Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. Just a kind of cliche for me to say that, but yeah, it's just a fantastic, fantastic book. Every time I read it, I just it uh, um, um, sort of recalibrates the way I kind of approach certain situations. So fantastic book. It's almost 100 years old, and it still lasts the test of time.
One of
The
my
other book
favorites
that
of all time. Love it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for
yeah,
mentioning that. Yeah.
yeah, great. And then the other book that I love is going back to my investment days is and I'm a huge advocate of Warren Buffett. And Warren Buffett's a huge advocate of his teacher, Ben Graham. So The Intelligent Investor. That's a difficult book to read every year. But I've read it a couple times, and I'm always kind of clipping up excerpts from it. So yeah, that's also kind of a classic book as well. Probably over 100 years old now, 120 years old. So um, yeah, fantastic book. Um, your second question,
Before you
well,
get to that question, man, I'm just gonna give a shout to Mark's book here. If you're looking on the screen,
Italian
Mark,
pizza.
just
Yeah.
talk briefly about this.
Yeah, I worked on this book. I joked about it because I told people for 2 years that this project took 8 years to complete. So this is kind of a blend of my passion for personal development and and my professional and personal story kind of merging. So something I like to share with clients, and but it blends Taoist wisdom with my stories that I've come up with. So a lot of humor, simplicity, but mostly authentic. The biggest lessons I've learned for the biggest mistakes I've made. And I don't share the huge ones in there, but there's enough to keep you entertained.
I love that. Well, next time I'm on the podcast, hopefully I'll be able to mention Tao Pizza. I'm gonna order it now.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. The mostly is a lot of fun.
Yeah, sure. And then quickly, I know we're running up on time, but Mark, your second question was what to tell 3PLs about our website. Was that right?
Yes, please.
Yeah, sure. So, look, first and foremost, I'm happy to talk to any 3PL. I spend most of my day having conversations like this, meeting brands and 3PL. So, always happy to meet any 3PL that's interested in participating. As I mentioned earlier in the show, we do have a free model. I know that paying a monthly fee is not for everyone. I think we're offering tremendous value, and we're certainly encourage you to check it out. But if you do want to start on the free plan, we also we don't lock you into contracts. It's you can cancel anytime, upgrade, downgrade. So we want to keep it really flexible and put the onus on third person to provide our value every single month that you're paying us a fee. So we'll love for you to join. And if you're a 3PL looking for a new qualified lead gen source, there's no better place than to go to thirdperson.co to check it out. So check it out there. My email is Matt, MATT at thirdperson.co. So feel free to shoot me an email as well, or find me on LinkedIn and, those other channels.
Matt, I want to be the first one to thank you. Thanks for sharing the journey. It's been amazing. People can check out thirdperson.co to learn more. You could check out more episodes on inspiredinsider.com and also specialracks.com as well. And thanks, Mark. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, thanks you. This has been awesome. Yeah.
Thanks for listening to the Tao of Pizza podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.